Great. Thank you, everybody. This is great attendance. We really appreciate being invited to give this talk. And both Ben and I are excited to be able to share the results of this analysis that we did over the last several years, the thought behind it, what our results were, and where we hope to take it from here. And we look forward to a good discussion afterward. First, to give a little bit of context, as I suspect many of you know, what we've observed directly or indirectly over the last 60 to 70 years is a massive transformation of the San Joaquin Valley into one of the world's biggest, most important agricultural economies in the world. About 2 million acres were put into production since 1945, and it now provides about 25% of the fruits and vegetables for the United States, as well as a lot or most of the certain crops for the world, including almonds and pistachios. And it's the equivalent of about a $30 billion economy. And so this is a really important place. And as we also know, this has come at a cost. We've gotten a lot of benefit out of that, but we've also lost a lot of things. And from our perspective, looking at what this has meant for nature, we've seen a 95% reduction in the habitats available, particularly in the upland habitats and the wetland habitats in the core of the valley. And one of the results of that is it has one of the highest densities of endangered species in the United States. And this is, constrained current use, and it puts a lot of these species and systems on the brink of extinction. But it's also come at a real cost for people and the sustainability and resilience of this landscape in the long term. This famous photo on the left, which I'm sure many of you have seen, illustrates just the land level change that occurred between 1955 and 1977 as a result of subsidence that was largely due to groundwater pumping. And during this last drought, it was really brought home to us how rapidly this landscape is changing, and why some people, including at NASA, have characterized this as one of the largest, if not the largest, landscape scale change of the Earth's surface in the world. During that last drought, we saw over 0.5 meter of subsidence in just over a year. In some places, they were experiencing 2 feet of subsidence per year, given the rate at which groundwater is being pumped. And so all of these, and the other thing that happened that was really alarming and catalyzed a lot of change is the scale at which agricultural land was fallowed during that drought. And as we all know, that we're very likely, this is just naturally a landscape that will experience droughts, and there's a chance we're going to experience more intense, longer droughts in the future. And so all of this inspired what had been discussed but never implemented for years, which is groundwater legislation that would finally regulate the amount of groundwater that could get used to try and achieve a more sustainable groundwater and water use overall in the valley. And this really huge land use change, or potential for land use change, is itself going to come at a real cost to the agricultural economy. And some estimates suggest, coming out of the Public Policy Institute of California, as well as the work you're going to see from us today, point to the potential for 500,000 or more acres of agricultural land coming out of production. Some of it permanently, some of it during annual fallowing. And that's going to come at a real cost. But it also creates this opportunity, and this is why the Nature Conservancy got particularly interested in this as part of our broader groundwater and water sustainability work, is that there's an opportunity here to remake this landscape into one that is more diverse, more resilient, and more sustainable going forward. The challenge is that in the absence of planning ahead and really thinking about what the various benefits could be, depending on how this plays out, we may very well end up in a very fragmented pattern of land retirement that, except for perhaps meeting the groundwater sustainability targets of SGMA, is unlikely to provide many other benefits, and it may actually even create a lot of challenges for air quality and land management in the valley if it's done that way. And we see this real opportunity to start now, as the plans get put in place, to think about how we can strategically retire land, and in the case of this study, restore some of that land to nature in consolidated blocks in ways that provide multiple benefits in ways that couldn't be achieved if such a fragmented pattern is the result over time. And that was the subject of this analysis. So that's when TNC decided we wanted to launch and fund this study, and we partnered with Ben and the Natural Capital Project and Water in the West at Stanford to do this, to get a view into what strategic land retirement and restoration could look like, and in particular one that optimizes for restoring some of these critically endangered ecosystems in the valley, in this case, the upland systems. And as you'll see, the models and the approaches we took are very amenable to examining other values as well. The objective of the study was to provide a valley-wide, spatially explicit example of what potential strategic land retirement and restoration options would look like, in that would help achieve the groundwater sustainability goals of SIGMA, also contribute to recovery of an endangered natural community, and contribute to meeting California's climate goals and improving human well-being in the valley. And so the study was recently published in Frontiers in Sustainable Food Systems, and the results of that are what we're going to present to you today. And I'll turn it over to Ben to talk through the study and the results, and then I'll close out and give you some views into how we're thinking about how we go forward. But I think we have a poll first.
Great, thank you. Sophie, are you able to send that poll out?
There you go, the poll should be up.
Okay.
The poll asks, what is your familiarity with the connections between land use and habitat and species conservation? And the second part of the poll asks, what is your familiarity with the potential to achieve multiple benefits via landscape management? So we'll leave it up for about 30 more seconds. A lot of people who don't. Oh, go ahead, Ben.
I was just double checking. I'm correctly sharing my screen rather than my Outlook calendar.
Yes, we can see the slides.
Great.
All right, here are the results of the poll. Most folks don't work in conservation, but have some familiarity with the connections between land use and habitat species conservation. And most folks have people in their organization who are involved in multi-benefit land use planning.
Great, good to know.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. I will now go over both the methods and the top level results from the study that we did that Rod laid out the goals of on the previous slide. So this slide is highlighting the fact that this is a multi-part study where we're actually answering a couple different questions, each of which are linked and kind of depend on the previous one. So those are laid out here, and I'll step through each one in more detail. But very briefly, we have this question of how is cultivation likely to change on the landscape, and how much retirement are we expecting to see at kind of a coarse sub-basin level? But because habitat is such a spatial concept, and habitat quality and potential habitat quality varies a lot on the landscape, we need to understand those patterns in a more fine grain at what I'll call the pixel level for this analysis, which is about 1 kilometer. And then conditional on those potential changes that SIGMA is going to bring about on the landscape, we want to think about where we can achieve restoration goals in a way that is optimal in the sense of causing a minimal additional disturbance to the agricultural transition taking place. And so we can think of sigma as sort of shaping to be abstract about it, shaping the cost surface for engaging in conservation within the valley. And so we want to be aware of what those potential changes are as sigma unfolds to guide a conservation strategy, and also identify opportunities for conservation and the ag community to work together to kind of shape the landscape in a way that produces these multiple benefits. And so the last part of that is just providing some quantitative indicators of the co-benefits that may come about from strategic restoration. So I'll just go through all these. There's a lot of steps in the study and a lot of details. So I'll go pretty fast, knowing that I'm going pretty fast, and happy to dig into any details during the Q&A. And just to provide a final orienting conceptual framework for people, when I'm talking about spatial and pixels, we can think of the landscape as currently mostly filled in, although that's obviously an abstraction. And then in the upper side of the right, we have this sort of checkerboard landscape that Rod alluded to in his opening slides. And we expect that we're going to be getting retirement as indicated by these white cells. And what we're interested in is, one term is reconfiguring those retirement patterns in ways that are minimally disturbing in terms of creating additional impacts for the ag economy, but also help achieve higher values of habitat and other co-benefits like soil carbon sequestration and things like that. So that's the high level framework we're going for. So the very first step is understanding from an economically realistic perspective what the changes in agricultural outcomes are likely to be at this coarse scale. And to do that, we analyze outcomes at essentially a sub-basin level. These are the study regions. You can see these are basically Bulletin 118 sub-basins. We've aggregated a couple of them for practical reasons, but this is essentially the San Joaquin Valley for you. And on the economic side, we utilize the SWAP model, which is a positive mathematical programming model that originally came out of Davis and has been maintained and further refined by ERA Economics. With Duncan McEwen was one of the co-authors on our study. And we use this because we wanted to have a realistic understanding of how the changes in water availability would likely affect production patterns. And in particular, we can get changes in average annual production, which is a headline number that is of high interest. But we can also, in this study, by combining with some assumptions about land use and some GIS data, make some estimates to differentiate the amount of land that's likely to be permanently retired from land that's likely to be intermittently fallowed, which is important since when it comes to restoring habitat, we care literally about the footprint of where things are happening. And so you can see a lot of cells and arrows on the right, but essentially you can take away that this is a relatively realistically based and calibrated economics driven model that still importantly represents water constraints. And so, which is one of the sort of key drivers of the scenario differences is the estimated difference in water availability with and without sigma. And so when we run that analysis under our main reference scenario, we find that the model is estimating about 86,000 hectares of permanent retirement across the valley, which is very roughly about 2 million hectares under agricultural currently. And so that permanent retirement is represented in these black bars on the right. The size of each bar overall represents the amount of land currently dedicated to agriculture within each of the analysis regions. The dark green represents land that would expect to be cropped under perennials, so essentially trees and vines. And then these, the light green and the light brown are the sum of those is land that we would expect to be in the long run, maintained within the agricultural footprint, but cultivated intermittently. And that kind of ratio of the green to that total area is an indication of how intensely things would be cultivated. And so, and I should clarify that a lot of that happens anyway. It's not the case that every single acre within the valley is planted every single year right now anyway. So, but this is showing kind of the long run average we would expect under a Sigma implementation and the assumptions that we worked with. So besides those headline numbers, the other main takeaway is just that there are these significant regional variations in the cropping patterns and in the fraction of retirement experienced by different regions. And then so the next step is putting those changes and cultivation statistics on a map so that we can then, in the step following, intersect that with habitat outcomes. So revisiting our abstracted figure, what we're trying to do is predict that if we didn't care about habitat, which is what we're referring to business as usual Sigma implementation, then we would get some places coming fully out of production as represented by the white areas. And then I've sort of enhanced this by indicating there are some places that would experience a decrease in cropping intensity because they aren't able to be cultivated as frequently. So that's what these other squares are doing. And so what we're trying to do is predict where those are likely to end up on the landscape as Sigma gets implemented. And so this is a highly uncertain issue, and we're not trying to pretend we have the single best estimate of those outcomes. And so instead we took sort of a scenarios exploratory approach and just looked at kind of multiple potential drivers of spatially varying factors that are associated with agricultural suitability. So all else equal, if something has poor soil and poor water rights or poor water availability, that's more likely to come out of production than a place that has high quality soil and a combination of secure surface water access and limited groundwater withdrawal historically. And then we just take those factors and make weighted combinations of them to provide an indicator of overall agricultural suitability. So very quickly, the layers that we use two different layers indicating features of the land. And these are coming from a study done by the Conservation Biology Institute. One layer is a lumped conception of land assets. Another is conception of land impairment. Those sound sort of like perfect opposites, but they're measuring different things, although they are reasonably correlated. And then we also developed a couple of our own custom layers related to groundwater vulnerability in terms of drawdown rates within each region and depth to groundwater relative to overall water use, and similarly looking at secure surface water rights relative to overall water use and things like that. And then also made an assumption that historical predictors of fallowing were likely to be predictive of future fallowing and retirement as well. I should say there are many different things one could use to input to this process, and so people could fairly straightforwardly swap out other conceptions or more refined estimates of these ideas. And so then we put those together and get what we call just an agricultural suitability map. And we get one agricultural suitability map per set of weight combinations that we use on those different factors. So if we say 90%, if we say that land impairment is 90% of the driver of what's going to cause retirement or not, then we get one map. And if we say surface water availability is 90% of the driver, then we get a different map, for example. And one final thing to remember about this, as you look at this map, you might be slightly confused because you'll see that there is blue and red in each region. And it's important to remember that these are only defined within each of the analysis regions. And so the fact that you see some red up in Turlock, for example, does not mean that that land is worse than some blue land down in Kern, for example. It's just relative to each of the analysis regions themselves. So then we take those and essentially say, within each region, the places with the lowest quality is most likely to be retired. And we can create maps indicating how often different pixels were indicated for retirement under our relatively simple land use change model. And what that reveals is some relatively consistent hotspots of retirement across a couple different regions, and of particular interest is what's occurring down here at the intersection of Thule and Kern. An important reminder is that these are not probabilistic maps. They're essentially just summing our scenarios, and so further analysis could delve into that in more detail. So these are indicating hotspots of retirement, and so if it turns out in those places that there's high habitat value as well, then those are good candidates for establishing expanded restoration goals. To also feed our optimization in the next step, where retirement is actually just one output of our land modeling, and we also get information on where we would expect perennials and annuals, as well as the cropping intensity associated with those annuals would be on the landscape. And so that latter map, and in particular the revenues associated with the given landscape configuration, feeds into our next step, which is the habitat optimization. And so what we're trying to do in the optimization at the pictorial level is find places for the animals in this map, while also finding places where bringing habitat in for those animals is going to have a minimal impact on agriculture. And at a more abstracted level, we can think about, in a landscape planning sense, that there's kind of a trade-off curve between what is achieved on a landscape in terms of habitat and what is achieved in terms of agricultural value. And so if we think of what's unfolding under sigma, if we don't care about habitat to begin with, we're at this point of essentially unsustainably high agricultural value. And then sigma is going to cause that to probably be reduced due to the water restrictions. But we're going to end up in a point where we don't necessarily gain that much on the habitat front. And so what this study is about taking notice of the fact that this curve is pretty steep right here and trying to proactively anticipate things and get a lot of habitat outcomes for a minimal additional impact on agriculture. And so to do that, we use what's called systematic conservation planning, and for this study, we need to make a number of specific assumptions, but we can discuss those in Q&A. But one of the major ones is just being aware that we are encouraging. One thing we can do with this software is encourage consolidation around existing natural areas, because we are aware that the chances of success and of species taking root are better when you have both a larger consolidated area period, and then also when that area is adjacent to places where the species already exist. So essentially this conservation planning approach is just a quantitative way to build all of these concerns in. And so part of how we do that is by inputting these habitat maps where we have essentially indicated what counts as high quality habitat for these different 5 species, which are representative of a broader set of 25 to 30 different, these are referred to as umbrella species that are representative of a broader suite of other endangered and threatened species. So if we get habitat goals achieved for each of these, we expect we'll be doing pretty well for even more. And as far as how it's represented in the optimizer, what we're going for is to say that this goal needs to be satisfied for each one of these. So you can't substitute. You can't say, we achieved 40,000 acres for giant kangaroo rat, so we only need to get 10,000 acres for blunt-nosed leopard lizard. But at the same time, if the same patch of land counts for both, then that makes our life easier, and it means we need to bring less total into restoration. So when we do that, we essentially run that optimization for each of the plausible future landscapes that we generate, and that generates a restoration portfolio in each one of those landscapes. And this, we can also compare those restoration portfolios to the predicted retirement patterns. And so this figure, which it's a little bit complicated, is essentially it's referred to as a bivariate color map, but it's trying to show at the same time the frequency things are selected for retirement, as well as the frequency that they're selected for restoration. And so all of these gray areas that you see are areas that were identified as likely to be retired in at least one scenario, but were never selected as a restoration solution. And then in the colored areas, you see combinations of, it indicates they were selected for restoration either infrequently or very frequently. And so, for example, these dark blue and light blue areas are places where retirement was frequently predicted, and they also frequently featured in restoration solutions. So these are kind of low opportunity cost areas to try to achieve habitat goals in those places. In other places, such as these yellow ones, retirement is not predicted very often, but they are still consistently identified as important for habitat goals. And so those are places where the conservation community would need to kind of proactively engage with growers in those regions to understand whether there's possibilities to either swap production to other places or intensify production on part of those landscapes, and potentially try to free up other parts of the land for habitat goals. And in all of the solutions, we actually only required about 45 to 50,000 acres of restoration to achieve that 25,000 acre target for all 5 species. So we know there's a lot of stacking and compounding where the optimizer is finding efficiency. And so just a final point on this is that you can see there is a lot of land predicted for retirement that is also unused. And so that to us suggests that there are possibilities for these land swaps or other ways to kind of shift the retirement pattern to other parts of the landscape while retaining land in production in places that are less valuable for habitat. And so moving on very quickly to the last little bit of the study, we also want to know what happens when land goes from looking like it does on the left to looking like it does on the right. And for our purposes, there are a lot of different outcomes that are associated with that. We wanted to demonstrate a couple of them. So one we looked at was just nitrogen. We tend to put a lot of nitrogen on the ground when we're growing crops. And some of that goes in the atmosphere as GHGs, and some of it seeps into groundwater. And that's referred to as excess nitrogen, the part that's not taken up by the crops. And so we just did a simple calculation using data from the UC Davis study of how much nitrogen would be reduced, and found that it was close to 20,000 tons a year would be reduced due to the change in production from Sigma, with a little bit more coming from the strategic retirement and restoration angle, which is not super huge, but many of you may know that nitrogen is a major health problem in the valley, both for air pollution and groundwater. So we think it is still of interest, even though it is a relatively small number. And similarly on the carbon front, we found that long run over 80 years, we could expect to see roughly 1 to 2 million tons of CO2 equivalent sequestered in the soil based on restoration portfolios. explored a bunch of uncertainties there, which is what's shown on the right. Happy to discuss that later. And then lastly, why are we talking about this in a FloodMAR series? And the reason, the way I think about this is that habitat restoration is just one potential multi-benefit answer to water scarcity challenges. And there are a lot of other land explicit tools being developed and land use related goals being examined, including FloodMAR via both AgMAR and dedicated recharge, as well as more dynamic conservation and directing water to wetlands for recharge as well. And so we think that the methods used here can be potentially bridged and integrated to these other questions. So I have one more slide, which is kind of like a pie in the sky. If only we could speak to all of these potential land use activities and be aware of the benefits that are coming from them, that would be the kind of like ideal decision support tool for spatial planning work that could emerge from engagement across these different efforts. So with that, I will turn it back to Rod.
Great. You guys should be able to see my screen now. Thank you, Ben. And I'll go through these quickly so we have a little bit of time for questions. But you might be asking where from here. And this is a strategy that TNC is advancing as quickly as we can in partnership with a lot of folks. So we see bringing these ideas in combination with our work around multi-benefit recharge and other groundwater efforts as part of our team to be essential to a bunch of the partnerships we think are going to be necessary. So we're trying to advance those with agencies and local partners like South Valley Water Association. And I'll say more about that in a minute. We're looking to and getting close to implementing pilot projects on the ground in the southern San Joaquin Valley, and then trying to both guide and inspire policy change and funding programs that can really move this idea forward, and in particular knowing that we won't achieve the optimal, the best outcomes for both nature and people unless we plan for this soon and set the landscape on that path as opposed to letting it happen in a more random way. So we're broadly trying to build the partnerships, provide pilot projects that show what's possible and how to do it, and then build the policies and funding investments that are going to be needed to make this happen. There's a couple things we put out recently. We put out a policy brief called the Roadmap for Restoration, which is available online on our Science for Conservation website. That is really a policy brief of the study itself, pointing to the core results. And in particular, one of the things that comes out of that is this is a blob version of the core areas we think should be targeted for upland restoration. And they're intentionally vague because we don't see the specific pixels that got picked in this study as the answer. But we do know that these areas broadly could deliver a lot of habitat value with relatively less impact on overall change that's coming with Sigma, additional change. So look for that and it'll give you an idea of how we're thinking about implementation. I'm really excited that on the beginning of April, we are having a new book come out that really built from this, but also a bunch of work that's been going on in the Valley for decades about the restoration at Atwell Island and other things. And so we brought a whole community of experts together to write this book that's coming out from Island Press that basically paints a picture of what have we learned from previous work and studies, both in the Valley and globally, about how to do this. And then brought together some others that speak to how can we bring the best tools and thinking to advance this idea. And this study is a part of that. There's a chapter in about study. And then also what are the socioeconomic implications and needs to help make this transition in the Valley that's equitable and sustainable. So look forward to that book. It's coming out in early April. It's available for pre-order on Amazon now. And importantly, we're on the ground working with close partners, and I'm really excited to share that we've helped stand up the Tule Basin Land and Water Conservation Trust with our partner Deon Vink in the South Valley and the Pixie Irrigation District and others down there, which is now going to be a land trust, a local land trust that can be the receiving body for some of these lands that get retired and put into restoration. And that'll include not just the upland restoration that we're talking about, but also dedicated recharge basins that are providing migratory bird habitat and so forth. And so this is the front page of their new website. And we're really excited. And we're also with them doing a planning grant, or in the middle of a planning effort for part of the Tule subbasin that's going to basically provide the spatially explicit roadmap for how to mix in upland restoration with recharge efforts to get to the right answer for that landscape. So we're on the ground doing that and looking for, partners and ways to advance that at a bigger scale. And we're continue to focus also on this is about upland restoration, but we're focusing a lot on what the aquifer recharge benefits that need to be delivered and how we can do that in multi-benefit ways. And we're actively piloting groundwater recharge efforts that provide migratory bird habitat in the Sacramento Valley, and beginning to have conversations and with some demonstrations in the San Joaquin Valley by others to how we bring that kind of effort to scale and make those recharge ponds and on-farm recharge efforts have multiple benefits. And another part of our team is also looking at another piece of the solution, which is smart renewable energy development in the Valley. And they recently released a Power Place report that charts a future for what kind of renewable energy development would look like in California to meet the state's goals. And all of these are really part of the solution. And so we do have our eye on how each of these pieces fit together that will ultimately make a more sustainable and resilient valley. So with that, I'll close, and this is our contact information, and we can entertain questions.
Thanks, Rod and Ben. That was great. I see, Rod, that you answered a few questions in chat. There are a couple more that I can help facilitate answering, but if anyone in the audience wants to raise their hand or turn on their camera, that'll get you in the queue for questions. So Camiar, do you have a question?
I heard the first part of your comment, turn on your cameras, and then you added.
Well, hello.
But I will take this opportunity to thank Rod and Benjamin for a great talk. This is really at the heart of a lot of the discussions, as you know, that's occurring and will occur in the Valley, seeing how Sigma is going to affect land use and water management. My observation, and I mean this in the most constructive of ways, is that the substance of your presentation is much more broad and holistic than the title of your talk. And I think words matter. And what I've tried to convey is, rather than talk about land retirement or fallowing, let's talk about repurposing land use for multiple benefits. And really the substance of your talk goes there. And it really is as much to help landowners and growers rethink how they would use their existing landscape to maximize their agricultural activities while maybe doing more aquifer replenishment and habitat restoration. So I think the term retirement and fallowing may make some defensive, the landowners, because it tends to signify devaluation of their land. But I know that's not the essence of your talk. And if we can convey that by repurposing land use and having multi-benefits on it and keeping the landowners on the land, we can achieve many of the same objectives.
Yeah, 100% agree. Hopefully we did a little better in the paper title.
Yes, I noticed that. The picture title is broader.
But yes, I totally agree. Thank you.
Yeah.
Camiar, I'll grab a couple questions from the chat then. If building on existing refuges wasn't a consideration, would there be new areas desirable for restoration as refuges?
So yeah, I can give the technical answer to that, and then Rod can give the practical answer. Which is, yeah, so that is like a tunable parameter essentially in the protocol. We thought it was pretty important to be clustering things, and so I don't know that we spent a lot of time exploring shutting that off, but that's definitely something that we could pretty quickly generate. But I think it's, from a policy standpoint, a pretty big lift to create a new area from scratch.
Yeah, we very much see that as a core principle, is build off of what exists, in part because of, you know, who's going to manage these lands in the long term is an important factor. In addition to the conservation value of the land goes way up when you have big blocks rather than fragmented pieces. So the results, if you look closely, are clustered around existing protected lands, especially in the Southern Valley, around Kern National Wildlife Refuge, Pixley, and a bunch of state wildlife areas. Then there are some areas in the north, particularly in the up in the near Coalinga, that would be new, and those would be more challenging, but we see those as real opportunities to create new reserves that are embedded in otherwise sustainable agricultural landscape.
Great, thanks. Another question from the chat. Are range maps available for all critical or umbrella species?
Range maps are available. I'd have to think where you could find those. What we use in this are habitat suitability models for all of those species that were developed by a then graduate student, Joseph Stewart, and can be made available. So it depends what you're looking for, but there are maps. The Fish and Wildlife Service generally, I think, has probably the best existing range maps just to get an understanding of general range. But if you want known locations and things like that, those are variously available or not, depending on who you're talking to. Thanks.
I don't see any other questions that you were unable to answer in the chat. Oh, I think one just came in from Mark Tompkins. I serve on the San Joaquin River Restoration Program Technical Advisory Committee, and I'm curious if you've thought about coordinating with the program that covers a large area. Bryant Dam downstream to the Merced River. It has extensive subsidence and floodplain habitat restoration need.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Good to see you here. We're broadly sort of scanning the horizon and engaging with partners who want to talk about this. That has not been an area of focus for us, just because we're trying to put some stuff on the ground to show what's possible and, you know, be able to put our hands on it and show and figure this out. Floodplain restoration, as you can tell, hasn't been an explicit focus of this analysis so far either. But from a longer term vision standpoint, absolutely. And we'd be more than happy to have that conversation.
That kind of gets to a question that I have and I think it'd be good for this group because, you know, next week, a lot of us will be meeting on putting a network together with all of the pieces that are going on with, you know, Sigma implementation, land use planning, and habitat restoration. There's a lot of different work going on. What are some ideas for linking it together?
Is that to us?
Yes, or anyone, anyone on the call, but you know, definitely to you guys. You know, how do you see some next steps for linking some of these pieces together?
We're doing part of that, and this in part goes to a question that Justin just posted in there. Is so we're actively partnering with and have contributed some of the science to a study being done by Point Blue Conservation Science, who we work very closely with, that was developing similar optimization models for multi-benefit recharge in the valley. And we will be bringing those together with this analysis. We have a whole multi-benefit recharge part of our strategy. This study just didn't bring those pieces together yet, but we're definitely doing that. We're mapping out where these things connect and overlap and trade off in the valley. And to your point about from a planning perspective, as many of you may know, there was a blueprint effort being developed by ag interests and others in the valley, and the consortium is now rethinking that. And I'm very much looking for the opportunity to bring this work and maybe some modifications of the modeling, as Ben alluded to be an input into that collaborative planning process that brings all the pieces together, where it's not just us, but the ag users and the local GSAs and so forth.
Great, thanks. I haven't seen any other hand raises. Any other questions that are out there? I'm just going to do a quick look through the chat. And so, Rod, with all the linking going on and connections being made and work ongoing, can we book you sometime again next year for a follow-up presentation in LunchMAR as these puzzle pieces start fitting together?
Absolutely. Julia Barfield is on this call, I think, and she's part of a recharge team, and she and Ryan Lester as well. Maybe we'll put them up to it to talk about recharge work. And I should mention Abby Hart, who is a co-author on this study, is our strategy lead for this upland restoration, but is working closely on a lot of the recharge efforts in the valley too. So happy to connect anybody with me, certainly, but any of them as well.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you both. I will just put in one final plug for the December 10th network workshop. Momentarily, this group broke the internet, or I like to say we broke the internet. Our Eventbrite page filled up. We had to put an arbitrary cap of 100 participants into Eventbrite. We surpassed that during this meeting, so thank you for registering. We opened it back up, so if you didn't get a chance to register, we encourage you to do so. We're very happily overwhelmed by the participation next week with over 100 participants. I will put out a final call for help with the large group that we have or now anticipate on Friday or Thursday, excuse me, next Thursday. If anyone wants to volunteer to be a small group leader, we were hoping to keep small group breakouts to 6 or 7. So that means we need a lot of help just managing the group. Shoot me an email. Let me know if you're willing to volunteer. Put it in chat. We need all the help we can get at this point and look forward to a very productive and fun meeting. And I'll open it up for the last couple of minutes. I see some cameras on. If any other folks have any announcements or things that they would like to mention in the chat or on our video feed.
Hey, Jenny, it's Mike.
Hey, Mike.
Just following up with Jenny's excitement about next week. Make sure that everybody has in mind that this is a work session. You're coming to work. It's not just a meeting. This is an opportunity for everyone who gathers to really put their 2 cents into the pile and develop the network into the thing that all of you want it to be. So it's not the sort of thing you can put up on the side monitor and kind of half listen to during the day. It's a work day. So I'm being the taskmaster while Jenny's being the enthusiastic cheerleader today. So it's going to be a great session. We're really looking forward to working with everybody. Anyway, just wanted to highlight that piece of it.
Thanks, Mike.
Taskmaster Mike. All right, well, we're about to close, but like Jenny said, if anyone else has other announcements or things you'd like to share, feel free to share them in the chat or turn on your video and share. In the meantime, I'm going to share our last poll. There it is. Share our last poll, which is just sort of an evaluative poll asking if the presentation was relevant to the work that you do, and if you are interested in participating in the LunchMAR network. And we want to acknowledge that there are plenty of folks that want to be part of the LunchMAR network that are not going to be joining the Building a Network workshop on the 10th. So if that doesn't sound interesting to you, staying engaged for a whole day, rolling up your sleeves, getting into the nitty-gritty of what a network might look like, there will be plenty of other opportunities to get involved.
Well, the good news is, as soon as I was going to say it, a no popped
You're
up.
watching the not relevant box.
Oh, well, I'll say thanks again, Rod and Ben. That was wonderful, and we look forward to hearing more in the future. And we'll ask Julia and Ryan to hopefully do a 2021 presentation on the multi-benefit recharge pilots that they're working on.
Jenny, you know you can hit us up anytime.
I know where to find you.
We're standing by.
Thanks, Julia. Well, thanks, everybody. Take care and happy holidays.
You too. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Happy holidays.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Thanks, Sophie.
Yeah, thank you, Jenny. Very interesting.
Yeah, no, that was great.
Yeah, all right. Okay, well, we'll see you all next time then.
Take care,
Thank you.
everybody.
Okay,
Bye.
bye-bye.
Bye-bye.